Elena Hart stood in the marble lobby of her husband's headquarters, clutching a homemade lunch, while a receptionist smiled politely and delivered words that shattered 7 years of marriage. "If you'd like to see Mr. Volkov, you'll need to schedule an appointment." She needed an appointment to see her own husband. The wife of Chicago's most feared mafia boss had become so invisible that even his own staff didn't recognize her importance. That lunchbox would stay unopened. Those divorce papers would be signed, and Adrian Volkov, the man who controlled an empire, was about to lose the only thing that ever truly mattered. If you're ready to see what happens when a powerful man realizes he's lost everything, stay with me until the end. And please, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The morning light that poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse should have been beautiful. It painted the polished marble floors in shades of amber and gold, touched the edges of expensive furniture that Elena Hart had carefully chosen years ago, and illuminated a space that most people would call a dream home. Elena stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by that golden light, and felt absolutely nothing. She had woken at 5:30, the way she did every morning, not because she was a morning person, she had never been one, but because it was the only time she could still catch glimpses of the man she had married. Adrian Volkov typically left the penthouse before sunrise, his phone already pressed to his ear, his mind already consumed by whatever deal or territory dispute or power play awaited him in the city below. This morning had been no different. Elena had heard him moving through the bedroom in the dark, the familiar sounds of his morning routine a backdrop to her pretended sleep. She had kept her eyes closed, her breathing even, because she had learned years ago that trying to talk to Adrian before he left only resulted in distracted half-responses and the familiar phrase, "We'll talk tonight, Malishka." Except they never did. Tonight would turn into tomorrow. Tomorrow would become next week. And next week would dissolve into the same endless cycle of absence and silence that had slowly consumed their marriage like rust eating through metal. The coffee maker beeped, pulling Elena from her thoughts. She poured herself a cup and carried it to the windows, looking out over Chicago's skyline. The city sprawled before her in all its morning glory, a kingdom that her husband ruled from the shadows, an empire built on fear and loyalty and carefully controlled violence. 7 years ago, Elena had known exactly who Adrian Volkov was. She hadn't been naive. She had understood that the charming man who courted her with poetry and old vinyl records also operated in a world most people only glimpsed in movies. But back then, Adrian had promised her something that seemed impossible for a man in his position. Balance. "I will never let that world touch you," he had said, holding her hands in his on a cool autumn evening in Millennium Park. "You will always be separate from it, sacred." And for the first 2 years of their marriage, he had kept that promise. Adrian had come home for dinner. He had taken her to galleries and concerts. He had remembered the small things, her favorite flowers, the way she liked her coffee, the fact that she couldn't sleep if he didn't kiss her forehead before bed. Then everything changed. Marcus Volkov, Adrian's father and the previous head of the family, had died suddenly of a heart attack. Adrian had inherited not just his father's position, but also his wars, his debts, his enemies, and his obligations. Overnight, the man Elena loved had transformed into someone she barely recognized. The change hadn't been immediate. It had crept in slowly, like winter stealing warmth from the air. Late nights became all-nighters. Date nights became canceled plans. Conversations became logistics. And gradually, invisibly, Elena had stopped being Adrian's wife and started being simply another detail in his complicated life. Something to be maintained but never prioritized. She took a sip of her coffee and glanced at the calendar on her phone. October 14th, their 7th wedding anniversary. Elena had stopped expecting Adrian to remember 3 years ago, after the 5th anniversary had passed without acknowledgement. But some stubborn part of her, the part that still remembered who they had been, had decided to try one more time. She had made his favorite breakfast, blini with sour cream and smoked salmon, exactly the way his grandmother used to make them. She had bought him a gift, a first edition of Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, because Adrian had once told her it was the book that made him understand the complexity of loyalty and betrayal. She had even written him a card, something she hadn't done in years, trying to find words that expressed both her love and her loneliness. All of it sat on the dining table, carefully arranged, waiting for a man who had already left. Elena's phone buzzed. A text from her friend Sarah. "Happy anniversary. Any special plans?" Elena stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Thank you. Nothing special." She didn't mention that she had spent the previous week researching divorce attorneys. She didn't mention that she had already scheduled a consultation for next Tuesday with Margaret Chen, a lawyer who specialized in high-profile separations. She didn't mention that she had been collecting financial documents, taking screenshots of accounts, and slowly preparing for a reality that felt both terrifying and inevitable, because Elena had finally accepted a truth she had been avoiding for years. She loved Adrian Volkov, but love without presence was just a memory, and she couldn't keep living inside a memory. The sound of the penthouse door opening made her heart jump. For one impossible moment, she thought Adrian had come back, that maybe he had remembered, that maybe this would be the day everything changed. But it was just Katya, their housekeeper, arriving for her shift. "Good morning, Mrs. Volkov," Katya said warmly, setting down her bag. Then she noticed the untouched breakfast on the table, and her expression softened with understanding. "He left early again?" Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Katya walked over and gently squeezed her shoulder. The older woman had worked for the Volkov family for 20 years. She had seen marriages rise and fall, had watched power consume good men, had witnessed the cost of the life they all lived. "You are too good for this loneliness," Katya said quietly in her accented English. "Even a queen deserves to be seen." The words hit Elena harder than she expected. She blinked back tears and managed a weak smile. "I'm fine, Katya. Really." But they both knew it was a lie. Elena spent the rest of the morning trying to distract herself. She responded to emails. She scrolled through social media. She considered calling her sister in Boston, but decided against it. Rachel had already expressed her concerns about the marriage too many times, and Elena wasn't ready for another "I told you so" conversation. By noon, Elena had made a decision. She would try one more time. Not a grand gesture or an emotional confrontation, but something simple and concrete. She would go to Adrian's office, bring him lunch, and ask him directly if he even remembered what day it was. And if he didn't, if he looked at her with that distracted expression and apologized while already moving on to the next crisis, then she would know for certain that it was time to let go. Elena changed into a simple but elegant dress, navy blue, Adrian's favorite color, and carefully packed his lunch into an insulated bag. She included the blini from breakfast, still perfectly preserved, along with a thermos of the Georgian tea he preferred and a slice of honey cake from the Russian bakery he loved. The drive to Adrian's headquarters took 20 minutes through downtown traffic. Elena had only been to the building a handful of times over the years. Adrian had always preferred to keep his professional life completely separate from their home, as if creating that physical distance could somehow protect her from the reality of what he did. The building itself was unassuming, a sleek glass tower in the financial district that housed Volkov Security Solutions on the top 3 floors. To anyone looking from the outside, it was a legitimate private security firm. And technically, it was. But Elena knew that the real business, the territory management, the enforcement, the negotiations with other families, happened behind closed doors and encrypted communications. She parked in the underground garage and took the elevator to the 32nd floor, her heart beating faster with each passing floor. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area that looked like any high-end corporate office. Marble floors, minimalist furniture, abstract art on the walls. The only hint of anything unusual was the presence of 2 men in dark suits standing near the entrance, their eyes tracking every movement with professional precision. Elena approached the reception desk, where a young woman with perfect hair and a polished smile looked up from her computer. "Good afternoon," the receptionist said pleasantly. "How can I help you?" "I'm here to see Adrian Volkov," Elena said, trying to sound confident despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. The receptionist's smile remained fixed. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I'm sorry," the receptionist interrupted gently, her tone professional but firm. "Mr. Volkov is in meetings all day. If you'd like to see him, I can schedule something for next week. Shall I check his calendar?" Elena stared at her, the words not quite processing at first. An appointment. To see her own husband. "I'm his wife," Elena said quietly. The receptionist's expression flickered, surprise, then embarrassment, then a carefully neutral professionalism. "Oh, Mrs. Volkov, I apologize. I didn't. We don't have your photo on file, and I've only been here a few months, so I didn't recognize." "It's fine," Elena said, though it wasn't fine at all. The fact that the receptionist didn't recognize her, that there was no photo of her in the system, that she was treated like any other visitor seeking an audience with the powerful Adrian Volkov. It all confirmed everything she had been feeling. She had become invisible even in her husband's own building. "Let me call up to his assistant," the receptionist said quickly, reaching for the phone. Elena stood there, clutching the lunch bag, feeling the eyes of the security guards on her. One of them, an older man with gray at his temples, stepped forward. "Mrs. Volkov," he said respectfully, and there was recognition in his eyes. "I remember you. From the holiday party 2 years ago. You wore a red dress." The kindness in his voice nearly broke her. "Thank you," Elena managed. The receptionist spoke quietly into the phone, then looked up. "Mrs. Volkov, I'm so sorry, but Mr. Volkov is currently in a meeting with the senior partners, and his assistant says it's expected to run for at least another 3 hours. She asks if you'd like to leave a message, or if you could come back." "No," Elena said softly. "No message." She set the lunch bag on the reception desk with careful precision, as if it were something fragile that might shatter. "Could you please make sure he gets this?" she asked. "Of course," the receptionist said, relief flooding her voice. Elena turned and walked back to the elevator, her heels clicking against the marble with a hollow sound that seemed to echo through the empty lobby. She felt the security guard's sympathetic gaze on her back. She felt the receptionist's uncomfortable pity. She felt the weight of 7 years of silence pressing down on her shoulders. The elevator doors closed, and Elena saw her own reflection in the polished steel. She looked like a stranger. When had she become this woman? When had she learned to smile through loneliness, to accept absence as normal, to shrink herself so small that even the people who worked for her husband didn't recognize her face? By the time Elena reached her car, tears were streaming down her face. She sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the steering wheel, and let herself cry for the first time in months. Not quiet, dignified tears, but raw, broken sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for the girl who had believed in love. She cried for the marriage that had slowly died while she pretended not to notice. She cried for the life she had built in her imagination, the one where Adrian came home and actually saw her, where anniversaries mattered, where she was more than just a beautiful accessory in a powerful man's carefully controlled world. When the tears finally stopped, Elena felt something shift inside her. Clarity. She had tried. She had been patient. She had given Adrian every opportunity to choose her, to fight for them, to prove that she mattered more than his empire. And he had failed, not through malice, but through neglect, which somehow hurt even more. Elena drove home in silence, her mind already moving through logistics. The consultation with Margaret Chen was in 4 days. She would need to gather more documentation. She would need to open her own bank account, something separate from the joint finances Adrian controlled. She would need to find an apartment, somewhere small and quiet, where she could figure out who Elena Hart was without Adrian Volkov. The thought terrified her, but staying terrified her more. That evening, Elena waited for Adrian to come home. She had changed out of the navy dress and into comfortable clothes, leggings and an oversized sweater. She had made dinner, more out of habit than hope. And she had rehearsed what she would say, the words she had been holding inside for far too long. Adrian arrived just after midnight. Elena heard his key in the lock, heard his heavy footsteps in the foyer, heard him sigh as he set down his briefcase and phone. "Elena?" he called out, his accent thickening the way it always did when he was exhausted. "You're still awake?" She found him in the living room, loosening his tie and pouring himself a drink. He looked tired, lines around his eyes she didn't remember, silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. For a moment, she felt a pang of sympathy. Then she remembered the receptionist's polite suggestion that she make an appointment. "We need to talk," Elena said. Adrian glanced at her, then at his watch. "Malishka, it's late. Can it wait until—" "No," Elena said firmly. "It can't wait." Something in her tone must have gotten through to him because Adrian actually looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in weeks. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting down his glass. "Do you know what day it is?" Elena asked. Adrian frowned, clearly running through his mental calendar. She watched him search his memory, saw the exact moment he realized, saw the guilt flash across his face. Fuck, he breathed. The anniversary. Elena, I'm so sorry. I went to your office today, Elena said, cutting off his apology. I brought you lunch. Your favorite. I wanted to surprise you. Adrian's expression shifted to confusion. I didn't know you were... My assistant didn't tell me. Your receptionist didn't recognize me, Adrian. She told me I needed to schedule an appointment if I wanted to see you. An appointment. To see my own husband. The words hung in the air between them. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she recognized from years of marriage. It meant he was trying to find the right words, trying to fix something he didn't fully understand. That's unacceptable, he said finally. I'll make sure every person in that building knows who you are. I'll have your photo. That's not the point, Elena said, and her voice cracked despite her best efforts to stay calm. The point is that I've become so invisible in your life that the people who work for you don't even know I exist. The point is that you forgot our anniversary. Again, the point is that I can't remember the last time we had a real conversation, the last time you asked me about my day, the last time you looked at me like I was someone who mattered. Adrian stepped toward her, his expression pained. You matter. Of course you matter. You're my wife. You're everything to me. Am I? Elena asked softly. Because it doesn't feel that way, Adrian. It feels like I'm just here, like I'm part of the furniture, something you come home to but never really see. That's not true. When's my birthday? Elena asked suddenly. Adrian blinked. What? My birthday. When is it? She watched him struggle, saw him mentally calculating, and felt her heart break a little more. April 20th? He said, uncertainty clear in his voice. 22nd, Elena said quietly. It's April 22nd. You missed it by 2 days. The silence that followed was deafening. What's my favorite book? Elena continued, her voice getting stronger. What do I do on Thursday afternoons? What's the name of my best friend from college? What am I afraid of? What makes me happy? When's the last time you asked me any of these things? Adrian stood frozen, and Elena could see the realization dawning in his eyes. You don't know, do you? She said. Because you stopped paying attention. You stopped seeing me. And I let it happen. I stayed quiet and patient and understanding, thinking that if I just waited long enough, you'd come back to me. But you never did. Elena, please. Adrian's voice was rough with emotion. Just tell me what you need. I'll fix this. Whatever it takes. Elena took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision she had made in that underground parking garage. I filed for divorce, she said. The color drained from Adrian's face. For the first time in years, maybe ever, Elena saw fear in his eyes. Real, visceral fear. What? The word came out as barely a whisper. I met with a lawyer last week, Elena said, and now that she had started, the words came easier. I'm filing for divorce. The papers will be ready next week. No. Adrian shook his head, moving toward her. No, Elena, you don't mean that. You're upset, and you have every right to be, but we can fix this. I can fix this. How? Elena asked, and there was no anger in her voice anymore, just exhaustion. How are you going to fix 7 years of neglect, Adrian? How are you going to fix the fact that I've spent more nights alone than with you? That I've celebrated birthdays and holidays and anniversaries by myself while you built your empire? I was doing it for us, Adrian said desperately. Everything I do is for us. To give you this life, this security. I don't want this life. The words burst out of Elena with more force than she intended. I never wanted the penthouse or the cars or the expensive furniture. I wanted you, Adrian. Just you. The man who used to read me poetry in Russian. The man who would drive across the city at midnight to bring me soup when I was sick. The man who promised me that I would always matter more than power. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't try to hide them. That man is gone, she said softly, and I can't keep living with his ghost. Adrian reached for her, but Elena stepped back. Please don't, she whispered. I can't. I need you to let me go. I can't. Adrian's voice broke. Elena, I can't lose you. You're the only real thing in my life. The only thing that matters. Without you, all of this. He gestured around them, encompassing the penthouse, the empire, everything. It means nothing. Then why didn't you fight for me when you still had me? Elena asked. Why does it take divorce papers for you to finally see me? Adrian opened his mouth, but no words came out. They stood there in the silence of the penthouse, two people who had loved each other completely, now separated by years of missed moments and forgotten promises. I'm sleeping in the guest room tonight, Elena said finally. And tomorrow, I'm going to stay with my sister for a while. I need space to think. How long? Adrian asked hoarsely. I don't know. Can I call you? Elena looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man she had fallen in love with buried somewhere beneath the layers of power and responsibility, and carefully maintained control. I need time, Adrian, she said gently. I need to figure out who I am without you. I need to remember what it feels like to matter to someone. She turned to leave, but Adrian's voice stopped her. One day, he said. Elena looked back. Give me 1 day, Adrian said, and there was raw desperation in his eyes. 1 day to show you that I can change, that I can be the man you need. Please, Elena. If after that day you still want to leave, I won't fight the divorce. I'll sign whatever papers you want. But give me one chance to prove that I haven't forgotten how to choose you. Elena wanted to say no, wanted to tell him that 1 day couldn't fix 7 years. But something in his expression, the vulnerability she hadn't seen since they were young and poor and building a life together, made her hesitate. 1 day, she heard herself say. That's all, Adrian. Relief flooded his face, followed immediately by determination. That's all I need, he said. I promise you, Elena. Tomorrow I'm going to show you that you still matter, that you've always mattered. Elena nodded, too emotionally exhausted to say anything else. She walked to the guest room and closed the door behind her, leaning against it as she tried to process everything that had just happened. Part of her wanted to take back the offer, to tell Adrian that 1 day was pointless, that some things couldn't be fixed. But another part, the part that still remembered who they had been, wanted desperately to believe that maybe, just maybe, the man she had fallen in love with was still in there somewhere. That maybe tomorrow would prove her wrong about everything. She didn't let herself hope too much. Hope, she had learned, was the most dangerous thing of all. But as she lay in the unfamiliar guest room bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of Adrian moving through the penthouse, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years. Uncertainty. And uncertainty, she realized, was better than the numb resignation she had been living with. Tomorrow would either confirm that their marriage was truly over, or it would be the first step toward something neither of them could predict. Either way, Elena thought, as sleep finally claimed her, at least she would know for certain. And knowing, after years of existing in limbo, felt like a gift all its own. Elena woke to the smell of something burning. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't place where she was. The guest room was unfamiliar in the morning light, too sterile, too impersonal, lacking all the small touches that made the master bedroom feel like hers. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, and with them, the hollow ache that had settled in her chest. She checked her phone, 6:15 in the morning. The smell of smoke was getting stronger. Elena pulled on a robe and opened the door, half expecting to find the penthouse in chaos. Instead, she found Adrian Volkov, one of Chicago's most feared crime bosses, standing in their kitchen surrounded by a disaster of flour, eggshells, and what appeared to be the charred remains of several pancakes. He was wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt, his feet bare, his hair disheveled in a way she hadn't seen in years. No suit, no phone pressed to his ear, no aura of dangerous authority that usually surrounded him like armor. He looked almost human. "What are you doing?" Elena asked, her voice still rough with sleep. Adrian spun around and she saw genuine panic cross his face when he noticed the smoke detector starting to blink red. "Shit," he muttered, grabbing a kitchen towel and waving it frantically under the detector. "I was trying to make breakfast, your breakfast, the way I used to." Elena leaned against the doorframe, watching him with a mixture of disbelief and something dangerously close to amusement. "You're burning the penthouse down." "I'm not burning it down," Adrian said defensively, though the evidence suggested otherwise. "I'm just out of practice." He finally managed to silence the smoke detector and turned back to face her, looking sheepish in a way that reminded Elena painfully of the young man she had fallen in love with. Back when they were poor and ambitious and making terrible meals together in a cramped apartment that barely had room for a bed, let alone a kitchen. "When's the last time you cooked anything?" Elena asked quietly. Adrian ran a hand through his hair. 7 years ago, maybe longer. The admission hung between them. 7 years. The entire length of their marriage, he had been so consumed by building his empire that he had forgotten how to do the simple things, the human things. "I called in sick," Adrian said suddenly, his Russian accent thicker than usual, another tell that he was nervous. "To my own organization. I told Dmitri that all meetings are canceled today and that I'm not to be disturbed unless someone is literally dying." Elena stared at him. "You did what?" "I promised you one day," Adrian said, meeting her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "One day to prove I can change. So today, I'm not Adrian Volkov, head of the Volkov family. I'm just Adrian, your husband. If you'll still let me try." Elena felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. She wanted to stay angry, to maintain the distance she had fought so hard to create, but the sight of him standing there in their destroyed kitchen, looking vulnerable and determined and terrified all at once, made it impossible. "You really called in sick," she said again, still processing. "I really did." Adrian gestured at the ruined pancakes. "And I really tried to make you breakfast. It didn't go well." Despite everything, Elena felt a small smile tug at her lips. "No, it didn't." "Will you let me try again?" Adrian asked. "Not the pancakes, the day. Us. Will you give me this chance, Elena?" She should have said no. She should have packed her bag and left for Rachel's house in Boston, put distance between herself and the hope that was starting to take root in her chest against her better judgment. But instead she heard herself say, "What did you have in mind?" Relief flooded Adrian's face, so powerful and genuine that it almost hurt to witness. "Trust me," he said softly. "Just for today, please." Elena nodded slowly, and Adrian's entire body seemed to relax. "Get dressed," he said. "Something comfortable. We're leaving in 30 minutes. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere we should have gone back to a long time ago." 25 minutes later, Elena found herself in the passenger seat of Adrian's personal car. Not the armored SUV he usually traveled in, not the town car with the driver, but the old Audi he had bought when they first got married and barely used anymore. It still had her favorite coffee cup in the holder, still had the CD of Russian folk songs they used to listen to on long drives. Adrian drove in silence through the morning traffic, heading south out of the downtown core. Elena watched the familiar streets pass by, recognizing the route with a jolt of surprise. "We're going to Bridgeport," she said. Adrian glanced at her, a slight smile touching his lips. "You remember." How could she forget? Bridgeport was the neighborhood where their story had begun, where they had lived in a tiny apartment above a Polish bakery, where Adrian had worked security at a warehouse while quietly building connections in his father's world, where Elena had finished her degree and dreamed of a future that felt both terrifying and limitless. They had been poor. They had eaten ramen more nights than not. They had shared one bathroom with a temperamental shower and a bedroom so small that they could barely fit a full-sized bed. And they had been happy. The neighborhood looked different now. Gentrification had crept in over the years. New coffee shops replacing old diners, boutique stores where there used to be check-cashing places. But the bones of it remained the same. The Catholic church on the corner with its fading paint. The park where families gathered on weekends. The streets where Elena had learned to navigate a city that had once felt impossibly large. Adrian parked on a side street and turned off the engine. For a moment, they both just sat there, surrounded by ghosts of who they used to be. "Do you remember the first time I brought you here?" Adrian asked quietly. Elena nodded. "You were embarrassed. You kept apologizing for the apartment, for the neighborhood, for not being able to give me more." "You told me you didn't need more," Adrian said, and there was something raw in his voice. "You said you just needed me." "I meant it." "I know." Adrian turned to look at her fully. "I spent 7 years trying to give you everything except the one thing you actually wanted. And I'm sorry, Elena. I'm so fucking sorry." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Show me," she said. "Don't tell me. Show me." Adrian nodded and got out of the car, coming around to open her door. A small gesture, but one he hadn't done in years. Elena took his offered hand and let him help her out. They walked through the neighborhood together, and with each step, Elena felt time folding in on itself. The coffee shop that used to be Stanislaus Bakery, where Adrian would buy her cherry pierogies every Friday. The laundromat where they had done their washing together, sitting on the folding tables and talking about everything and nothing. The corner store run by Mrs. Chen, who used to slip them discount vegetables because she knew they were struggling. Mrs. Chen retired, Adrian said, nodding toward the store. But her daughter runs it now. I made sure she got a good price on the lease when the building was bought out. Elena glanced at him. You did that? I do pay attention to some things, Adrian said quietly, just not the right things. They continued walking until they reached a small park, barely more than a playground and a few benches surrounded by trees. It was here that Adrian had proposed 7 years ago, on an October evening when the leaves were turning gold and the air smelled like autumn. Adrian led her to the same bench where he had gotten down on one knee. It looked older now, the paint chipped and faded, but it was the same bench, their bench. They sat down together, not touching, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. I used to come here, Adrian said finally, after the really bad days. The days when I had to do things I wasn't proud of, when I had to make decisions that kept me up at night. I would drive here and sit on this bench and try to remember why I was doing it all. Elena turned to look at him, surprised. I didn't know that. I never told you. I didn't want you to see that part of me, the part that was drowning in responsibility and violence and obligations I never asked for. Adrian's jaw tightened. My father built an empire, and when he died, he left me with no choice but to maintain it. Every day I tell myself I'm doing it for you, to protect you, to give you the life you deserve. But I never asked for that life, Elena said softly. I know. Adrian looked down at his hands. I know that now. But by the time I realized it, I was so deep in that world that I couldn't see a way out. And somewhere along the way, I started using it as an excuse. Every missed dinner, every forgotten anniversary, every night I came home too late and too tired to be the husband you needed. I told myself